can know about the machine that lives in the dark inside the skull, receiving information from the outside world through one set of nerves, and through another set issuing orders obeyed by muscles and bones. Read among many good books on the subject, Brain and Personality by W. H. Thompson, who understands his subject. It is published by Dodd, Mead and Company. Men originally did not know that feeling and thinking dwell in the brain. The word brain does not occur in the Bible. When the book was written, it wasn't suspected that the cold, gray organ isolated in the skull had anything to do with thought. Babylonians and others later believed that thought was in the liver. Their priests carefully examined for information about the future, livers of animals offered in sacrifice. The Jews believed that the soul was located in the heart, the mind in the kidneys, the gentle emotions, compassion, etc., in the bowels. Therefore, the Bible says, "His reins," meaning his kidneys, "instruct him in the night seasons." Elsewhere it is said, "The Lord trieth the heart and the kidneys." And Jeremiah denounced the hypocrites who, he said, had the Lord in their mouths but not in their kidneys. Aristotle decided that the brain had nothing to do with thought, and it was a refrigerating plant to cool off the blood. One man, Alcmaeon, who lived before Plato or Aristotle, taught that the mind was in the brain. He based his belief on discovery that total blindness was caused if you cut the optic nerve leading from the eyes to the brain. Otherwise, men scouted the theory until the great Greek Galen, physician to Marcus Aurelius, revived and proved it. Broca, scientist who died in 1881, was first to understand the human thinking machine. The part of your brain with which you speak is called Broca's convolution. He located speech in the rear part of the third frontal convolution. Injury to that part destroys speech, absolutely. When that Frenchman successfully explored the brain and taught how it worked, he did more important exploring than 1,000 Perrys, Livingstones, or Stanleys. As you possess 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, and 2 feet, so you possess 2 brains. Each brain is complete, separate, and can, if necessary, do all the work of thinking, just as 1 eye, if necessary, can do the work of seeing. Money and happiness, the 2 great objects of life, never have been attained and retained except through rendering useful service. If you are right-handed, the convolution in your left brain does the talking. If you are left-handed, it is the right-handed convolution that talks. If the talking part of the brain is destroyed in a young child, the other brain can be taught to talk. In a man of 50, injury to Broca's convolution destroys speech for life. The brain becomes hardened with age and, like an old dog, cannot be taught new tricks. We are born with no knowledge of speech. Each new brain must be taught everything from the beginning, speech included. Education begins when a baby points to its hand and is told the name of the thing to which it points. If you tied the left hand of a child, compelling it to point only with its right, speech would surely begin with the left brain. If you tied down the right hand and compelled the child to point with its left, it would be left-handed, and the right brain alone would learn to speak. Seeing, hearing, recognizing our friends, tasting, smelling, everything that we do has its separate place in the brain, as a book has its place on the library shelf. Your brain can be so damaged as to make it impossible for you to recognize members of your own family, although you would see them. Injury in another place would destroy sight. One injury would make it impossible for you to tell one sound for another, the bark of a dog from the song of a bird. You would hear noises, but not know their meaning. Another brain injury would make you deaf for life. As the left-handed man speaks with the right side of the brain, and vice versa, so the man left-handed hears and understands sound only with the right side of the brain. Nobody knows how the mind works or what the thought is that enables a 2-legged animal glued to this earth to measure accurately the distance of a fixed star billions of miles away, weigh the sun, or announce with accuracy the weight of this earth. One theory teaches that the mind is like an Aeolian harp. giving out thought when outside forces strike it, as the Aeolian harp makes music when struck by the wind. The other important theory likens the brain to a violin that, no matter how skillfully made, must be played upon by a thinking being before it can produce music. What works the brain, or how or why, no one knows. The ancients said the earth rested on the shoulders of the giant Atlas. Atlas stood on the turtle, and there they let it drop. It didn't seem worthwhile to ask upon what the turtle stood. We say that our nerves of sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing inform the brain. The brain informs the consciousness orders the will, and the will gives orders to the body. The will, like the thing that the turtle stood on, remains unexplained. When you put on another man's hat and it falls over your ears, you are indignant. You know the other man concludes that he is your mental superior. That does not follow. You can no more reap a generous crop of pay from a sowing of a poor grade of service than you can reap a crop of wheat from a sowing of wild mustard. A brain of normal size is usually better than the brain abnormally small. Idiots and half-witted persons usually have small heads and lighter brains than normal human beings. Helmholtz, one of the world's most learned men, had a brain weighing only 45 ounces. 13 men that died in an English poorhouse had brains weighing more than 60 ounces. Webster's brain weighed only a little over 55 ounces. Dollinger, learned student and expounder of theology, had a brain weighing 37 ounces. Among 5 races, Swedish, Bavarian, Hessian, Bohemian, and English, the English are found to have the smallest average brain weight, the Bohemian the highest. Size of head and weight of brain do not always go together. A brain, like an orange, may have a thick covering. A small saw of the right kind of steel will cut through a big iron bar. A small brain of the right material is more important than mere brain bulk. Women's brains, as well as their skulls, are smaller than men's on the average. As time passes, the substance of which your brain is made sets, becomes, mentally speaking, hard like concrete. After a certain age, a man cannot change his opinions. He thinks he doesn't want to, but in reality he cannot. Between 20 and 30 and 40 educated men receive new ideas easily. After that, with difficulty or not at all. Unless an opening has been made into the brain through which the truth may go, in youth, the truth cannot get in later. Hence, the importance of having what is contemptuously called a smattering of general information and general opinions. Each smatter may leave a hole to let in the light later. Uneducated men rarely accept a new thought after 25. Beyond that age, they can hate, but think with difficulty. That makes mobs so dangerous. When Harvey announced that the blood circulates through the body, pumped by the heart, any fool, you would say, should immediately have recognized the truth of Harvey's discovery. Yet that truth, so plain to us, was denied by all the great doctors of Europe except some of those under 40 years of age. The minds of the others had settled into solid concrete. Voltaire, in his chapter on statesmen in the Philosophical Dictionary, says he does not write for statesmen of his day because they haven't time to listen, but for the young men that will be statesmen later. You cannot model or reform solid concrete. The scientific world is puzzled by the fact that we should have 2 complete brains, as we have 2 feet and 2 hands. The second brain seems unnecessary. Still, we all have it, ready, in case of accident to the speaking brain, to take up the work of speech, thought, and perception, if the accident comes early enough. Nature does give her big work in spherical form. The suns and planets are spheres. Water in the brook, or the blood in your veins, rolls in round drops. Perhaps there's a good reason, to be developed later, for a spherical brain with its 2 hemispheres. Someday we may use one brain for our little work of thought and organization on this earth, the other for exploration and contemplation of the outside universe. It hath not yet been shown what we shall be. Why not pay the incompetent, lazy, unskilled workman the same wages as the man who is skilled, industrious, and highly efficient? Would you, if you were the employer? The two brains that live back of your eyes, above your nose and ears, and under your hair, deepening their convolutions, increasing their power as long as you think, deteriorating with dreadful rapidity when you stop thinking, are separated by a cleft and united at the bottom of the cleft by an interesting bridge called corpus callosum. It is a bridge of white fibers passing from one brain to the other. Information is supposed to travel over this bridge from one brain to the other. There is no certainty as to its use. Men have lived normally without it. Someday the experiment of transplanting one half of a very young human brain in the place of one half of the brain of a young chimpanzee may be attempted. Anti-vivisectionists take warning. Like yourself, your little brother, the chimpanzee, has two complete brains, and you would find it difficult to tell the brain of the chimpanzee child from that of a human child. Your brain has its bark like that of a tree, called the cortex, and below that a white cold substance like the hard wood inside of a tree. The thinking is all done in the brain bark or cortex. Thought apparently flows in there, as the life-giving sap flows in the tree's bark. As all your seeing, hearing, and identifying is done in one of your brains, so all of your thinking is done in one brain, never in both at once. An accident of childhood can decide which shall be the working brain and which the idle brain through life. It was a great shock to the superficial when it was shown that the chimpanzee's brain possesses not only every lobe, but every convolution of the human brain. Broca's convolution is there, only the monkey cannot speak. Huxley even proved against Owen that there is not in the human brain one single peculiarity missing from the lobe brain of a baboon. The dissecting knife cannot explain the difference that separates, in worth, the baboon's brain from the brain of a scientist. No animal talks, or ever has said a word, with all respect to the late Dr. Garner. No human race has ever been known that did not possess speech, however low its intelligence. Every word you say to express all your thought is located in a small part of gray matter not larger than a hazelnut. Break a blood vessel in that part of your brain, and you are dumb. Injure that part of the brain slightly, and you may forget how to speak English, yet be able to retain your knowledge of French or of some dead language. The mental shelf holding the English language may be destroyed, and the French or Greek shelf remain intact. I think, therefore I am, the scientist says. Why we think, or how we think, or what it is that thinks, whether thought is real, created by us, or printed on our minds from the outside, as the sun's light prints a photograph on a plate, we do not know. Even sleep, the brain's vacation, is a dark mystery to us. What happens when the brain sleeps and the body rests? Does mind, spirit, consciousness, or whatever the thinking machine is, go off to enjoy itself elsewhere, as the chauffeur leaves his car when he runs it into the garage for the night? You must say, we sleep because we are tired. Part of us is tired, part is not. Everything that requires effort of the will causes fatigue. If your will makes you work, run, or jump, you tire and must rest. But one part of your brain, working unconsciously, puts upon certain nerves or muscles a task that lasts without ceasing for 100 years, if you live as long, without a second's interruption, day or night. The power that you use in taking a single breath, using the muscles of the chest and abdomen, is equal to the strength that would be required to raise 500 pounds, 1 inch. More than 30 times every minute, as long as you live. Certain muscles act with power enough to lift 500 pounds, 1 inch from the floor, and they never rest. And that wonderful engine and muscle, the heart, how does it last without rest? Carrel, the French surgeon, operating on the lung cavity of a dog, held in his hand, without injuring it, the animal's beating heart, saying, "The most wonderful engine in the world." It is that, in animals and in us. Something in your brain of which you know nothing keeps the heart working. Two nerves running from the lower part of your brain, the medulla, to the heart, regulate the work of that engine. Stimulate one of those nerves with an electric current. Your heart instantly doubles its speed and power. Stimulate the other nerve. The heart beats more slowly. Overstimulate it, and the heart stops. Cut that second nerve running to the heart, and the heart races like a team of horses with the reins cut. One nerve drives the heart faster, like the whip in a coachman's hand. Another one holds it back, like the reins fastened to the bridle. And as the heart's action is controlled, so everything within our bodies, fearfully and wonderfully made, is controlled from the brain's dark cortex, muscles and nerves that regulate blood pressure. The marvelous system that controls the body's heat so that blood temperature doesn't change a fraction of a degree between the equator and the North Pole. And about all that automatic management, we feel and know nothing. Whoever reads a book on anatomy or psychology asks at the end, "What is the thing about which I have been reading? What is it that lives within us, recognizing facts reported by the nerves, sending out through the feeble hands and words of man orders that change the earth's surface, tear down mountains, and unite oceans?" Ask me a question which I will find hard to answer, and you will have rendered me a genuinely useful service by causing me to think. 2,400 years ago, Democritus of Abdera, taught by the Chaldean Magi, said, "Man lives plunged in a world of illusion and of deceptive forms which the vulgar take for reality. To tell the truth, we do not know anything. Learned physicians and physiologists of today study tissue, nerves, muscles, and also confess, concerning the power ruling us, that we do not know anything. Only the flash of the eye reveals the indweller, the soul. But does it? The horse's eye seems to flash, as he neighs and paws the ground, hearing the bugle blow. Was he also an indweller of a lower grade?" You have just heard a very fine and very easily understood lesson on psychology. If you thought and digested that which you heard, you now know more about psychology, the human mind, than 99% of the people of the world know about it. You understand now why I recommend organized effort upon the part of the churches, schools, and newspapers in planting the golden rule philosophy in the minds of the young, because this is the only place where it can be made to stick. After you finish listening to this, go to your public library and read The Science of Power by Benjamin Kidd. Also, Thinking as a Science by Henry Hazlitt. Either of these books can be supplied by your local bookstore or by Montgomery Ward and Company, Chicago, Illinois. After you read these two interesting books, which will require not more than a few hours, you will know more about the human mind than all the people of the world, except that relatively small number who have specialized in psychology. Incidentally, you will possess all the way from 10 to 10,000 times as much power to attain your chief aim in life as you possessed before doing this prescribed reading and thinking. The difference between a $25,000 a year man and a $1,500 a year man is largely a difference of understanding the principles of psychology. Inform yourself on this subject and see that those in whom you are interested are likewise informed. You now have the idea. What are you going to do with it? When? How? If this editorial has caused an idea to shape itself in your mind, be sure to keep that idea alive and at work. Tell others about it. Write about it. Think about it. Because all this mental exercise, which will develop the idea more and more until it becomes a part of you, and then you will use it as freely and as skillfully as you use your right hand. But it will help you produce that which a million right hands could never produce without it. It will teach you to think accurately and reason logically. It will carry you into leadership that will not end until you get to be the person whom you wish to be. My definite aim in life is to place principle above the dollar and humanity above the selfish individual who would get without giving, and to help my fellow men do the same. To sow the seeds of revolution in the hearts of my fellow men until they rise and work with coordinated effort to the common end that civilization may offer something greater than the privilege of being bound to the weary treadmill of toil and of standing always in fear of starvation. To master intolerance and help others do the same. To carry on a constructive educational program that will help men and women see the advantages of cooperation and the disadvantages of fighting one another in their mad scramble to worship at the shrine of Mammon. To organize a chain of newspapers that will spread like a net over America, and whose pages will carry only clean, constructive, truthful news, and whose editorials will arouse and inspire millions of people until they free themselves from the eternal grind of the wage-bound and get out from under the heels of the mad money-getters. To render service that is greater in quality and quantity than is paid for, and to help others see the advantages of doing likewise. To lay aside prejudice and lend a helping hand to all, regardless of their religious, political, racial, or economic tendencies. To scatter seeds of sunshine wherever I go, aiming always to create a welcome for my presence. To remember that I am a public servant, and that the greatest honor which can come to a man is the honor of serving well. To gain the confidence of my fellow men by first deserving it, and to so conduct myself that this confidence will never be undermined or betrayed. Finally, to accept whatever responsibilities life may bring, seeking always to serve and never to shirk, always to help and never to hinder the wheels of progress as they roll on toward that goal for which every human being is striving, which is happiness here on earth. Chapter 15. Applying the Golden Rules. The 15th billboard in the road to success is Applying the Golden Rules. And now comes a professor in Harvard University with a letter that starts our editorial typewriter to clicking. We print both the letter and our reply with the object of giving our readers a chance to do some thinking on the subject under discussion. My dear Mr. Hill, I have been a reader of your magazine ever since the first edition appeared 4 years ago, and I have studied your philosophy with sustained and increasing interest from month to month. It has been very illuminating to watch the development of your own reasoning process since you began writing these uplifting essays, and I have reason to believe that you have accomplished more good than you are aware of. However, I have been disappointed because you do not seem to have yet discovered that the golden rule, within itself, is not sufficient to carry a man to success. Think it over, and it will be very obvious to you that a man could easily starve to death in the midst of plenty, and still apply the golden rule in all of his transactions with others. Pardon this intrusion, but I know from your literary works that you are a man who welcomes suggestions, even though they do not harmonize with your own viewpoint. The foregoing letter came as a mild shock to us. Is it possible that a professor of Harvard has been reading after us for 4 years without correctly interpreting that which we wrote? Undoubtedly so, and we take the blame to ourselves. And that is, we take the blame up to the present point, but from here on we pass the buck by frankly saying that if the Harvard professor or anyone else who reads these lines fails to understand our viewpoint regarding the relationship of the golden rule to success, it will not be our fault, for we are going to be plain. To begin with, we disclaim having ever stated that the Golden Rule alone is sufficient to carry anyone to success, because we have known for many years that it is not. According to our viewpoint, there are many factors that enter into success, not the least important of which is the definition of the word success itself. Let us say, for the sake of illustration, that the accumulation of money in excess of actual requirements for living is success. Money is accumulated through the application of power. Mind you, I said accumulated, which is not the same as inherited. Power comes through organized effort. In no other way. When you develop power through organized effort, you bring together many factors and blend them in the right proportion. Then, you put the result of this blending of factors back of a well-organized plan. This plan varies according to the nature of the station in life or the thing you aim to acquire through its use. There are 15 of these factors out of which power may be developed, and we have mentioned them in these columns scores of times, from every angle and viewpoint that we could conceive, because we knew that this was necessary in order to make our premise clear to people of varying ability to interpret. It can do no harm if we mention these 15 factors once more, nor will it do any harm if we repeat that power may be developed from a proper blending of these 15 factors. The first one is a definite aim in life. Then follow the other 14, namely, self-confidence, initiative, imagination, action, enthusiasm, self-control, the habit of performing more work than paid for, an attractive personality, accurate thought, concentration, persistence, learning from failures and mistakes, tolerance, and last, but by no means least, applying the Golden Rule. We have never said that the Golden Rule alone was sufficient. It comes at the end of the list, but we say now that which we have said many times before in scores of different ways, that no position in life can endure, and no success can be permanent, unless based upon truth and justice, which is the same as saying that success will not last unless it was attained through the application of the Golden Rule principle. Wealth is in the hands of those who have the intelligence with which to get it and hold it. There is no escape from this fact. The law of the survival of the fittest prevails, and always will. Any student of Darwin knows that there is such a law, and knows also how it works. Nature creates enormous numbers of field mice, the majority of which find their way into the stomach of the hawk, the owl, the weasel, or some other more fit creature. The word fit is not the same as the word just. Perhaps the field mice that feed the owl are as just as those that escape and propagate the species, but they are not as fit, meaning that they are not organized and have not sufficient power to survive. In every species of animal, including the human race, there are certain individuals that are favored with superior fitness to survive. Never in the history of the world has there been such abundant opportunity as there is now for the person who is willing to serve before trying to collect. The man who knows how to organize his efforts and intelligently direct them can get all the money his imagination can conceive, and there is nothing on this earth that can stop him. Whether he will be happy and successful with it after he gets it is a different matter. Success, as we understand it, must include happiness. But there is no doubt that men can get money in large quantities without applying the Golden Rule, or enjoying happiness over the possession of the money after they get it. The 15 factors herein mentioned contemplate the use of organized effort, or power, in a way that will bring real success, the sort that is well mixed with happiness. Most men have at least a portion of these 15 factors already under their control, but what they need is the addition of those which they have not built into their scheme of life. One could have the first 14 factors well under control, but if he failed to guide his efforts by the 15th, he could not be a permanent success. Power could be developed by a proper blending of the first 14 factors, but that power might lead to destruction instead of success if it were not guided by the Golden Rule principle. If this does not make clear our viewpoint with reference to the relationship of the Golden Rule to success, we must plead inability to express our meaning through the English language. Most of the great achievements have been born of struggle. Nature has arranged her plans so that every living thing must progress through struggle. This necessary struggle is often very disagreeable, and most of us would shield ourselves from it if we knew how. The greater our struggle, the more we learn. Nature plants desires in our hearts and then surrounds the object of these desires with many obstacles that we must overcome before we attain the thing desired. Nowhere do we find it a part of nature's plans to hand us something for nothing. She makes us strive for everything we get, and she makes us pay a price for it. One of the most deeply seated desires of the human heart is that of possession of wealth. The man who is not urged into action by this desire for wealth is an oddity among his fellow men. Inasmuch as this desire is so universal, we have reason to believe that nature placed it in the human heart as a means of causing us to struggle. Whether we get all that we struggle for in this world or not, we ought to take comfort from the thought that we have at least had the privilege of struggling, and that out of this struggle we have learned something that may serve nature's plans further along the way. The moment we stop struggling, we begin to atrophy and finally die. Nature says, you must keep growing or get out of the way. We cannot grow without struggle. This ought to give us comfort when the struggle seems hardest, because rapid growth comes from hard struggle. When you lose your sense of humor, get a job on an elevator, for your life will be a series of ups and downs. Fear is a terrible drawback. Among the most dangerous and repressive fears is that of what other people will say about us. Bald-headed men could save their hair if they were not afraid to leave off the hats, with the tight bands that cut off the nerve lines that feed the roots of the hair. But fear of what they will say keeps men from leaving off their hats. We recently asked a public man what he thought to be the real cause of so many strikes. He told us, but before he did so, he pledged us to a promise not to mention his name. He, too, was afraid of what they would say about him for expressing his honest opinion about the labor situation. That indefinite, imaginary they has kept many a genius imprisoned in his own head because of fear to act and express himself frankly. Suppose people do criticize you. What of it? Any fool can criticize, and a lot of them do. But their criticism doesn't hurt anyone except themselves. It marks them for what they are. Men who analyze and think seldom criticize themselves with frankness. The man or woman who boldly does what seems to be right, even though it may not be in conformity with the views of the crowd, possesses strength of character that knows no such words as "I fear" and "impossible." I have just talked with one of these thinkers. He did not pledge me to omit his name. When I asked him what he thought about the present labor situation, he quickly replied, "If labor should win all it asks for, which it will not, we might as well move to Russia, where they make no pretense of permitting the people to enjoy freedom. The present issue between capital and labor is clear and easily defined. Capital is fighting for the right of men to work where they please, for whomsoever they please, and under whatever arrangement they please. Labor is fighting to exclude from employment all who do not pay tribute to the self-imposed leaders of labor. If labor should win, it would mean that the very fundamental principle upon which the Declaration of Independence was founded would be swept aside, and we would no longer have ground to boast of this being the freest country in the world." Anything nebulous about that statement? Whether we agree with it or not, we have the highest respect for the man who had the courage to thus frankly express himself. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and the man who is afraid to call each by its proper name is not entitled to the benefits of that which is right, nor immunity from the effects of that which is wrong. Whether we agree with him or not, we have every respect for the man who stands on his two legs, looks the world squarely in the face without flinching, and tells it what he believes. In front of the typewriter on which these lines are being written hangs a big sign that reads as follows: I am becoming more successful every day in every way. A hard-boiled egg, who is a friend of ours, was admitted into the royal sanctorum for a few minutes, and as soon as his eye lit on this sign, he said, "You don't believe that stuff, do you?" And I replied, "Of course not. All that it ever did for me was help me get out of the coal mines and find a place in the world where I'm serving upwards of 100,000 people, in whose minds I am planting the same positive thought that this sign brings out. Therefore, why should I believe in it?" As he started to leave, he said, "Well, perhaps there is something to this sort of philosophy after all. I've always feared that I would be a failure all my life, and so far my fears have been thoroughly realized. You are condemning yourself to poverty, misery, and failure, or you are driving yourself on toward the heights of attainment solely by the thoughts you think.